Hello, welcome. I'm Jen, a guide with Footprints of London. While we can't get out on the streets to guide you in person, I'm bringing the streets to you. Today, we're going to take a virtual tour of Dartmouth Park Hill in Archway. It's a fairly steep hill, running for about half a mile from its junction with Highgate Hill in the north, just next to Waterloo Park, down to Tufnell Park in the south. It's also the boundary between two London boroughs, Camden to the west and Islington to the east. So our tour today is going to take us on the edge of Islington. We'll start at the top of the hill because it's always easiest to walk down. At the top of Dartmouth Park Hill stands St Joseph's Roman Catholic Church, or Holy Joe's as us locals like to call it. It's a local landmark. Whenever I'm looking out over London from afar, I can usually spot its green copper dome. It stands 130 feet higher than the top of the cross on the dome of St Paul's Cathedral. Standing here, we're on the cusp of three London boroughs. Dartmouth Park Hill, just opposite, as I said, is the boundary between Camden, with the trees of Waterloo Park here in the west, and Islington. If we go down Highgate Hill, it will take us to Archway. To the north and east is Haringey. If we go along Hornsey Lane, it will take us to Archway Bridge in the direction of Crouch End. And Cromwell Avenue takes us down to Archway Road. And between the two we can see that there's another church. This is St Michael's, formerly Highgate Congregational Church, converted to residential in the 1980s. As we continue, and up Highgate Hill to the north, we come to, no surprise, Highgate. But back to St Joseph's Church. The church was established here in 1850 on the site of a pub called the Old Black Dog. The priests who bought the pub had to disguise themselves because there was a lot of suspicion of Roman Catholics in those days. In fact, the landlord of the pub had withdrawn it from the market 10 years earlier because he had had a dream that it was sold to papists. And in the end, that was exactly what happened. At first, the priests conducted services in the pub buildings, but the Catholic community in the area grew rapidly, particularly with the arrival of many Irish labourers, navigators or navvies as they were known, who settled in the area working on roads and railways. So by 1860 they were able to build a purpose-built church. But the community continued to expand and soon outgrew this church, and in 1888 they were able to build the magnificent church that we see here today. If we take a closer look at the front of the church, we can see the cornerstone where this date's recorded. Here we can see the cornerstone of the church, and taking a closer look, we see the date of 1888. We'll now leave the church and cross to the corner on the other side at the top of Dartmouth Park Hill. Here we can see two rather curious stone stumps, parish boundary markers. Up until 1900, with the advent of the London County Council and the formation of London's metropolitan boroughs, parishes were the main unit of local government in London. Among other things, they were responsible for poor relief and for providing workhouses for those who were unable to support themselves. These were paid for out of local rates, and only people living in the parish were entitled to support, so the parish boundaries needed to be clearly marked. The one on the right, we can see SPP, St Pancras Parish. That would be in today's Camden. And one of the boroughs that made up today's London Borough of Camden was the Metropolitan Borough of St Pancras, along with the boroughs of Holborn and Hampstead. The rather more eroded stone on the left is probably a boundary marker for St Mary Islington Parish. Dartmouth Park Hill was the boundary between these two parishes, as well as being the boundary between the two boroughs today. We'll find more evidence of this boundary as we go down the hill. So let's make a start. Just at the top of the hill, we can see the middle gates to Waterloo Park, and it's tempting, especially on a sunny day, to take a stroll through the park, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to head straight down the hill, between the church and the park. We come to the bottom gates of Waterloo Park. Waterloo Park gets its name from Victorian philanthropist and Lord Mayor Sir Sidney Waterloo. This was formerly his estate, and he bequeathed it to the public to be a garden for the gardenless in 1889. Just below the park, the yellow brick buildings are the Highgate Mental Health Centre, part of the Camden and Islington NHS Foundation Trust. But they were built in 1870 as the Workhouse Infirmary for St Pancras Parish. We can see the main hospital down the driveway. Here's the view of the main hospital building looking down the driveway, and another view of the frontage of the hospital from the edge of the park. Sir Sidney Waterloo, the donor of the park, was the first chairman of the Board of Guardians for St Pancras Parish, and Florence Nightingale, the lady with the lamp whose 200th birthday we celebrate this year, advised on the design of the hospital. In 1948, when the NHS was founded, the St Pancras Infirmary, together with two other workhouse infirmaries, formed the Whittington Hospital. Just on the other side of the hill is the Islington Infirmary. Here we're standing at the back entrance to today's Whittington Hospital. The Islington Infirmary was built here on the site of a former smallpox hospital. The smallpox hospital building is still part of the Whittington Hospital complex today. It's the yellow brick building that we can see just here. The smallpox hospital was built in 1848. It moved here when its previous building was demolished for the building of King's Cross Station. It was one of two isolation hospitals in London built to deal with the smallpox epidemic at that time. The other one was in Liverpool Road and has now been converted to social housing. When the smallpox hospital moved out in 1889, the Islington Guardians took over this building for the Workhouse Infirmary. At that time, St Mary Parish, Islington, was one of the most densely populated parishes in the country. 340,000 people lived in St Mary's, Islington. So this building wasn't really large enough, and in 1900 they opened a much larger infirmary just opposite. We'll see more of those buildings as we continue down Dartmouth Park Hill. Here at the corner of Magdala Avenue, we can see more of the Victorian hospital buildings, and down beyond the chimney here is the more modern hospital buildings and the main entrance to today's hospital. Here's the main entrance to today's hospital, and as it's called the Whittington Hospital, it has to have a cat. There's a rather splendid black cat here above the entrance. The original Whittington Hospital, as I said, was formed of 3 workhouse infirmaries. The St Pancras Parish Workhouse Infirmary, further up the hill, the St Mary's Islington Infirmary, which we've just looked at, and the Holborn Union Infirmary on Archway Road, which we'll have to look at on another day. So because there were 3 hospitals, one of the names initially suggested for the new hospital was Trinity. But the name Whittington won out. It honours Dick Whittington, London's most famous mayor, who allegedly heard the sound of Bow Bells and turned again to become thrice Mayor of London on nearby Highgate Hill. But that's a story for another day. And now we'll return to Dartmouth Park Hill. On the opposite side of the hill are the terraces of the Whittington estate, part of Highgate New Town, built in the 1970s, revolutionary social housing by the Camden Architects Department under Chief Architect Sidney Cook. Well worth exploring another time. As we continue down the hill, we pass the red brick St Peter's Church, built in the 1870s and converted to residential in the 1980s. A couple of little shops here. The pottery is now closed. We take a look. High up on the wall of the pottery, we can see this rather rusted metal plaque. It's another parish boundary marker. St Mary Islington, SMI. This rusted one is the one on the wall of the pottery. A bit further down, between numbers 90 and 92, we find another St Mary Islington boundary marker. And I love the way this one has become two-tone, where the houses have been painted on separate occasions. But before we get as far as that house, we're going to have a blast from the past with the hippy-trippy 70s. In the 1970s, this terrace of houses along here was squatted, and it was Kelvin, the mushroom maniac, who painted the now faded Atomic Power No Thanks mural on the wall. Also in this house at one time there were a group of Buddhists living, and they used to serve tea to people passing by from their kitchen window here. On the opposite side of the road, the yellow brick housing is phase 2 of Highgate New Town. The scaffolding there is from about a year ago because Google Street View is not live. It was just being taken down after repairs following a major fire a year earlier. Although we can no longer buy coffee or tea from the Buddhists, there is a coffee shop. On the corner of Bickerton Road, we find Crick's Corner Coffee Shop. It takes its name from the fading ghost sign up on the wall here. Here's a photo from a few years ago where it was less faded, and we can see that the sign says Crick's Corner. Albert Crick ran a bookshop and lending library here from about the 1920s up until around World War II. When I first moved here in 1990, it was a corner shop run by an Indian couple, Fred and Sue. When they retired and sold up in 2013 and the shop was refurbished, another Crick's Corner ghost sign was revealed. We're going to cross Bickerton Road to discover one of Archway's hidden gems. We're outside the entrance to Dartmouth Park. It's not really a park at all. It's actually an area of land above and around a covered reservoir. The railings up here surround the top of the reservoir, and the wall that you can see just beside them runs along the top of the roof. The reservoir was built in 1855 by the New River Company and connected to their waterworks and pumping station at Stoke Newington. It's still in use today and managed by Thames Water. The actual name of the reservoir is the Maiden Lane Reservoir, because Dartmouth Park Hill and its continuation along Brecknock Road and York Way down to King's Cross was an ancient byway called Maiden Lane. But by the 1870s, this section of the road had been renamed Dartmouth Park Hill. So when the park was created in 1972, it made more sense to call it Dartmouth Park than Maiden Lane Park. So let's take a walk into the park. We need to be careful to observe social distancing as we walk along the path round to the back of the reservoir. And there we find what I think is one of the best hidden secret panoramic views of London anywhere. We're only looking at the middle third of it. It actually runs much further to the west, out and beyond the BT Tower, and if we go to the east, we can see beyond the Olympic Park and Stratford. Here we're looking out to the city's eastern cluster of skyscrapers, and towering over them all is the recently completed 22 Bishopsgate, 912 feet high, but still not as high as the Shard, which stands 1,016 feet high. Certainly, though, it's much taller than this black skyscraper in front of it. This was the city's first skyscraper, built in 1980 as the NatWest Tower, now called Tower 42. It's 600 feet high, and at that time there was discussion as to whether it was too high. Clearly times have changed. The Gherkin is almost disappearing amid the rest of the skyscrapers being built round here. Across here, St Paul's looks very small and diminutive. It's hard to believe that from 1710, when it was completed, up until 1963, it was the tallest building in London, 350 feet high. Before we leave the park, the last building I'd like to look at is the Caledonian Market Clock Tower, standing 151 feet high. Fabulous views from the top. It's recently been refurbished and open to the public. It's closed at the moment, but I hope to be able to take you up there when it's reopened soon. We leave the park and walk down Dartmouth Park Hill. And on the wall outside the reservoir, we find another parish boundary marker. This one can be quite hard to spot because it's often hidden between the overgrowing ivy. But if you are walking down here and want to find it, you need to remember that it's just before the bus stop. The church that we can see ahead of us is St Mary Brookfield. Let's take a closer look. St Mary Brookfield was built in the 1870s. The architect was renowned Gothic revivalist architect William Butterfield. The polychrome brickwork, the use of different coloured bricks to make patterns to emphasise the architectural features, was one of his hallmarks. Just beyond the terrace of houses below the church, we come to the Lord Palmerston pub. Just behind the railings on the corner of the pub, we find another parish boundary marker. It's quite difficult to spot this one since the pub built railings round their front garden. But what we can see is that this is SPPM, St Pancras Parish, because this is on the Camden side of Dartmouth Park Hill. Continuing down the hill, we pass the Victorian mansion blocks of the Peabody Palmer estate. And we come to the railway bridge across the Goblin Line, as the Gospel Oak to Barking overground branch is often referred to. This bridge was rebuilt in 2016 when the railway line was upgraded, and at the same time the parish boundary marker, the last one we're going to find on our walk, was beautifully restored. Here it is in all its glory. We're now almost at Tufnell Park, a complicated five-way junction as we can see from the road sign. And so we arrive in Tufnell Park. Here we have a classic Leslie Green tube station with its oxblood red terracotta tiles, opened in 1907. To the left of the station, Tufnell Park Road will lead us to Holloway. To the right of the station, Brecknock Road, the continuation of the old Maiden Lane, will take us down towards King's Cross. On the opposite corner, the Aces and Eights Bar was formerly a branch of Barclays Bank, and here Fortis Road will take us to Kentish Town. But we're going to finish, appropriately as we started, with a dome. The tall domed tower of the Boston Arms pub dominates the junction of Junction Road, leading down to Archway, and Dartmouth Park Hill. It was built in 1899, replacing an earlier Boston hotel. Today, it's an Irish pub with large screen sports, and also home to the highly regarded Dome music venue. So that brings us to the end of our trip down Dartmouth Park Hill. We've taken in 4 churches, several parish boundary markers, and a fabulous view. I do hope you've enjoyed it and will join me again for another exploration soon. Dartmouth Park Hill features in my walk Archway My Way. I'll be leading it again as soon as possible. Look out for it on my Footprints of London schedule and come and see that fabulous view for yourself. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.